Choices, 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 all kinds of choices. Helen gave us a list of choices even as she was talking to Jeremiah and the other children this morning. Does it ever feel to you like we are just constantly surrounded by choices? We live in a day and age where it seems to me we confront an overwhelming array of choices. Sometimes it seems like we may take that opportunity, that privilege, which it is in many ways to be able to choose things. We may take that for granted, but sometimes it feels like this overwhelming array of choices is a burden. And it's a heavy obligation and responsibility on us. And sometimes it's just a case of not being able to make up your mind. Some of you can remember a time when there were only 3 TV channels to choose from. How many of you, raise your hand, remember there were only 3 TV channels, and 2 of those you probably didn't get good reception on anyways. And you had to watch what was broadcast at a specific time. But now, as we all know, you can scroll through a multitude of on-demand streaming services and find literally whatever you want whenever you want it. And then what usually ends up happening? This is what happens in my house. You scroll and scroll and scroll, flipping back and forth until you're just too tired to watch anything anyways, and you just shut the TV off and go to bed. At times like this, Helen will usually say to me when I sit down and we ask each other, what do you want to watch? And I say, well, give me the control and we'll take a look. And she'll say, don't do this to me. Don't put me through this. You have to choose one show which you're going to watch right now. I've been enjoying a new book I got recently, written by an author, Marilyn McIntyre, and her book is called Make a List: How a Simple Practice Can Change Our Lives and Open Our Hearts. And it's a delightful book in which she explores how the discipline and the practice of making all kinds of different lists is really deeply a spiritual practice, a prayerful practice in which you seek to discern and think about the things that you face. But she also writes in this book that we face a time of chronic choice overload, and it creates in us a kind of unfocused wanting, an itchy state of discontent or a vague, unspecified wanting during which you find yourself musing in front of an open refrigerator door or a closet, wondering what satisfaction would really feel like and look like for you. We all know that we're beginning to struggle with kind of a sense of COVID fatigue. And I think part of the reason for that fatigue is that we just daily have to face choices about how we're going to act and how we're going to behave in order to be as safe as possible. Whereas before, we never really had to think about those kind of choices, the things that you're going to do. And so one of the choices you have to make is not simply choosing to wear a mask. I hope we're all choosing to wear a mask. You have to choose which mask you're going to wear. We have so many people sewing masks for us and sharing their talents. We have this just great array of masks. Do I wear a mask that reps my church? Do I wear a mask that reps my football team? Do I wear plaid? I see some plaid. I see polka dots back out there. Which mask are you going to wear today? Sometimes it just is tiring to think about having to choose the mask that we're going to wear. Sometimes the significance and the consequences of our choices can make us weary. They're sometimes more serious choices. Do I undergo the surgery now, or do I just adopt a practice of watching and waiting? Is this the right time for me to change jobs, or is it better to stay where I am? Do you send your children back to school, or do you just let them stay with virtual school? These are weighty and they're important decisions, but they're also stressful. We've certainly passed through a week of choice making. And I've heard many, many people say that whatever the outcome, I'm just glad it's over. And I don't have to think about choosing anymore. The story from Joshua reminds us that this is not a new experience for the people of God. Choose this day whom you will serve. Joshua thunders at the Israelites, as part of his final words to them. As for me and my house, Joshua declares, we will serve the Lord. This is a farewell speech by Joshua. In the passage immediately before this, he declares to the Israelites, I'm about to go the way of all the earth. This is Joshua's departing, his dying words. It sounds very familiar to Moses' farewell speech at the end of Deuteronomy. And it underlines the continuity of Joshua's authority with Moses' authority, and it reinforces for the people the importance of covenant renewal for their ongoing faithfulness as God's people. You know, there are important stories throughout the Bible, important moments, important times, such as the transition of leaders, such as the movement of the people from lands promised by God into lands given by God, that are recognized as being critical moments, critical times for people to recommit themselves to their covenant relationship with God. There are points in life and in history where the future is filled with great promise, but moments where it's also filled with great peril. And the people face a choice at that moment. The promise of living as God's people and the peril of forgetting and forsaking the God who brought them on the journey thus far. Such moments like that, I always think, are beautifully expressed in the last verse of the great hymn written by James Weldon Johnson, Lift Every Voice and Sing. God of our weary years, God of our silent tears, thou who hast brought us thus far on the way, thou who hast by thy might led us into the light, keep us forever in the path, we pray. Lest our feet stray from the places, our God, where we met thee. Lest our hearts, drunk with the wine of the world, we forget thee. Shadowed beneath thy hand, may we forever stand, true to our God, true to our native land. Powerful words about the nature and importance of moments of choice. They declare, God, keep us in your light. God, keep us in your path. God, don't let us forget you when we face all the choices the world sets before us. In fact, the words of this great hymn sound to me like they're words that they could have been sung by the people of Israel in response to Joshua's exhortation. After gathering all of Israel at Shechem, Joshua recounts the story of Israel as Helen described in the reading of the passage today. He begins with the call of Abraham and the journey from Ur to Canaan, through the captivity in Egypt, the sending of Moses to lead the people to freedom, and the long journey and struggle back to the promised land. And as Joshua speaks to the people gathered there at that moment, he isn't just telling them about things that have happened in the past long ago. He is connecting their current life to God's faithfulness to them throughout their whole history, throughout the whole story. You are here now, today, facing this moment, Joshua says, because of who God is and what God has done. That's something that can never be forgotten or forsaken. Choose this day, Joshua declares, whom you will serve. The greatest threat to the people of Israel's existence throughout the whole story of the Bible isn't from an outside power or from another nation. The greatest threat is always that they will abandon God and fall back into serving other gods, the gods they served before God called them to be his people. Or that they will abandon God for the other gods of other lands and other peoples they meet throughout the journey of their lives. It reminds us that the greatest threat to faith in God, even our faith in God today, is always the temptation to choose something other than God as the source and the center and the purpose of life. At its core, faithlessness, always in some way or another, turns out to be idolatry. It is misplaced love, misplaced desire, misplaced worship. It is giving yourself to false gods, serving false gods in some form or another. Joshua calls the people at that moment to join him in renewing their faith in the God who is the reason for their existence, the source of their past, the giver of their present, and the promise of their future. Choose this day whom you will serve, Joshua says. Put away your former gods. And then Joshua offers this confession that invites all the people to join with him. As for me and my household, we will serve the Lord. It may not seem like every day for us is a day in which we face life-defining choices. Every day may not feel like a moment when the issue is put before us in such dramatic fashion as it is put in this story of Joshua challenging the people of Israel before he dies. Every day may not feel like a choose whom you will serve this day kind of moment. But it does seem to me that in a very real way, in a way that we experience, every day is filled with choices. As we are constantly trying to discern and follow the contours and possibilities of what living as people who trust God and profess faith in Jesus Christ looks like. Every day we face choices as to how we will answer Jesus' call to follow him. Every day we face choices by which we will either grow deeper in our relationship with God through following Jesus, or as we are driven by unfocused wanting and vague discontent, we follow more and more other voices and values that saturate life around us and demand our desire and our loyalty. Every day is filled with choices like that. Choices which may not seem at the moment life-defining, but they are indeed life-shaping. I remember a time in my life when I felt I faced a deep, important personal choice and seemed to be wavering, seemed to be struggling about what I was going to do. And I remember hearing a sermon given by a woman who was a powerful preacher. And the thing I remember most about the sermon was the title. And the title of the sermon was The Good Gift of Hard Choices. I found myself passing through an experience where it just constantly seemed like a struggle, constantly seemed stressful, having to try and decide. But as I heard her speak about the good gift of hard choices, I began to be more open to the grace of God being presented and offered to me in the opportunity to choose and to discern, to follow where God was leading me. In some respects, it seems to me the life of faith is a matter of being formed every day by Jesus Christ. Being formed by Jesus Christ every day to be able to make the choices to serve him faithfully with openness and joy and gratitude. Daily, we may be given the good gift of hard choices as a part of our being formed and shaped into the image of Christ. And those choices may feel hard. Those choices may feel heavy. Those choices may feel like they're pulling us apart in our very core. But they are a reminder of God's care and God's concern for us, calling us to the choice to follow him. Sometimes those choices are ones that nag at us as we try to navigate living in love and peace with other people who think differently than we do, or who voted differently than we did, who are passionate about different things than we are. Sometimes those choices are ones that push us to look inwardly at the places of darkness and anger within ourselves, and to offer those places to God for healing. Sometimes those choices seem to me to indict us for the ways that we choose the selfish act and the hurtful word and the callous judgment more quickly than we choose to undertake the hard work of selflessly following Jesus to show mercy, compassion, and open ourselves to the needs of others. Sometimes I think those choices that we face every day call us to patience and perseverance and preparation to remain steadfast in our faith when the course and the character of life seems to just simply be volatile, erratic, and random and unknown. Daily, we face these choices in which we are being called to be shaped by the Spirit's work on us to become more and more like Christ in our lives and in our beliefs and in our behaviors. We're given this parable of Jesus at the end of Matthew's gospel, a parable that in many ways is disconcerting. 5 foolish virgins missed something because at the moment when it was needed, they didn't have access to it. At the moment when it was needed, it wasn't there. They needed oil for light, and when they didn't have it, they missed the celebration for the bridegroom. And there were no second chances. No opportunities to run at that point and go get what you needed and return and participate. It may be a truth, a sort of real-to-life experience that we hesitate to look closely at, but we know it happens. We know that there are times that come to us when you don't have what you need. And when you don't have what you need, something is lost, and something is closed, and something is shut. Some of you may remember the work by a psychologist, Gary Chapman, and one of his first well-known books was The 5 Love Languages, and we all delighted in learning about the different kinds of love languages that we need for ourselves and we need to give each other, and we took love languages test all the time. But I think the most critical part of that book and the other books he wrote were not simply the identification of love languages, but the realization that we all had what he called a kind of love tank, a reservoir of love that we needed to have and to have access to in order to be able to maintain relationships of love with each other. And when we let those reservoirs and when we let those tanks become dry and empty at the moments when we need to turn them and summon the resources of love to be staying engaged in the relationships important to us, if they're empty and dry and brittle at that point, you will miss something. The opportunity will pass. And you won't have what you need. I'm not sure exactly what this parable means, but if we put it juxtaposed to the story of Joshua and the call to make choices, perhaps is simply saying to us, don't let your tank become empty. Don't let your love reservoir go dry. Make sure you have what you need within your life of faith to be able to recognize and celebrate and participate in the grace of God given to us in Jesus Christ. Our lives of receiving and living off of God's grace and gratitude are lives that depend on us nurturing and caring for and growing that grace and our gratitude in our hearts. And when you come to a moment when you need it most, and it isn't there, what will happen? You'll be empty. That's all. Choose this day whom you will serve. Don't be left empty. Choose joy and gratitude and love and care and compassion and justice and hope and peace, and let those grow in your life so that when the moment comes, you can celebrate and share and be grounded in God's love for you in Jesus Christ and God's love for all. Amen.